let's hop into it. I'm excited.
Me too. Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Kira. I am our education coordinator here at the Gabriel Foundation. Most of you know me already, but we're super excited. We're joined today by Dr. Amy Zhao of the Budgie Academy. We are doing our first webinar of the year, so I'm super excited that this is a really fun and new topic for us, and something that we haven't done before. I think this will be a really awesome learning opportunity for everybody, whether you have budgies, whether you have small birds, whether you're thinking about getting small birds. I don't know about you, but right now, all I'm seeing is just budgies being found outside. That is like our entire timeline on Facebook, all of the found pet groups, all of that. It's just budgies everywhere.
Yep.
I feel like there's just going to be kind of a surge of people getting budgies that maybe fell into their lap or things like
Mm.
that. So I think this is a super important topic for people to understand, and even for people that have had budgies for forever. There's always something that you can learn and always ways that you can better your care. Yay, so we're super excited. Thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing. I'm excited. I think budgies are obviously I'm very biased in my in my desire to talk about budgies. But yeah, I think we'll jump in. We'll do some questions at the end and then yeah, hopefully we can bring something that everybody, if they're thinking about getting a budgie, if they already have a budgie, would find useful and insightful. That'd be nice.
And logistically, if you guys have any questions while we are going through, please put them in the Q&A portion of the webinar. It's at the bottom, and then that way I can keep all of the questions, and then we'll be answering questions at the end. So while we're going, if you think of the question, type it in the chat or in the Q&A, but we'll answer those towards the end here.
Okay.
Alrighty.
All right. So let me share my screen and all right. So everyone see the screen okay? All right. So I guess I will jump in. All right. So thank you, Kira, for the introduction, but also thank you for the title, more than just a budgie. I think when we talk about budgies, we like to talk about them as a small parrot, but here today we'll talk about budgies more specifically. But I think when Kira and I were meeting about this talk, one of the themes that we've noticed is that it really is other small parrots as well, right? Budgies are so numerous and we can use them as one of our first examples, but a lot of the stuff we talk about today is applicable to other small parrots or oftentimes even larger ones. And you'll see the overarching principles of care really widely apply, but we're going to talk about some specifics today. So whether you are interested in budgies, you're hoping to get some budgies, you have some budgies and you want a better life for them, or you have budgies that are having a great life, but you just have some questions or want to know more, want to upgrade your care, hopefully there'll be something that you find valuable. And then if you have questions, we can, of course, answer them at the end. So let's jump in. So a little introduction. So hi, I'm Amy. There's me. Yes, I was at one point blonde. I don't think I will do that again. That was a lot of upkeep work that I realized I was not willing to do after I became blonde.
I like the blonde. I think it looks good.
It was fun, but I definitely did not desire that amount of upkeep, like the amount of products and everything. But I've had budgies for quite some time now. I've been a full-blown budgie person since 2014. The ones that you see here on the left side, this is Dappy and this is Fitzy. I got them the first year of my PhD, and it was really Fitzy's hormone issues and me trying to fix her hormone issues that led me to look more into budgies. I walked a very common journey that a lot of budgie people walk. We see an egg laying issue, we go to the veterinarian, back and forth, hormone shots, try to figure it out. And it was very interesting for me because both my degrees are in animal science, and reproductive physiology was my concentration in my PhD. And it was very interesting to me because I could kind of see we were missing something. I felt like something was missing. It doesn't seem right. It's not in line with any of the physiological principles for any of the species that we study. And it just didn't make sense. It was completely against how the large principles of biology typically are. So I decided to take my PhD knowledge and go back to the scientific literature and also to look for information in the parrot world. And I basically realized that we had a huge gap in this area. Nobody had really taken a careful look at this species in a long time, but the science was all there. The science is completely there. We know the triggers that govern the reproduction of this animal. We know a lot more about their nutritional needs than a lot of people think. But it really did take a sharp scientific eye. And the reason it hadn't happened is nobody ever thought these birds were worth looking at. And that made me so sad because I'm obsessed with them. So this is Dappy and Fitzy. These two budgies passed a few years ago. And since then, now I have three more budgies. Louis, who I found outside near my house, and I never found his owner. I adopted Bino as a companion. And then I also have two cockatiels, Gandalf Sydney, and then Bluebell, who's a more recent addition that someone also found outside. And I said, that's okay, just bring her to me. And she lives here now. So the goal of today's talk, I'm hoping to do three main things that I think are the most key for elevating everyone's concept of the budgie, but also your budgie's care. I think a lot of times the tactical things are very easy to teach once you understand why things are the way they are. Otherwise, what I find when you're missing that mindset, teaching the tactical things just results in a lot of confusion because there's a lot of conflicting information. You know, this person says this and that person says that. But when you understand how the biology works and have that understanding of the larger picture, it becomes much easier to sort through all of the misinformation and information to find out what's really working for your budgie and seeing what's really happening with your potential budgie you may get later or your current budgie that you have in your home. So what I'm hoping to do is, one, give you a more complete picture of what a budgie really is, identify some really common myths that are misleading budgie people. These are the ones that I see most common that come into my practice for consulting that people are stuck on that I help them get over. And then uncover the truth of what these budgies are, of who they really are and what they really can be in a home environment. So my question to you will take like a couple seconds. Think about what comes to mind when you hear the word budgie. When you hear someone say, I have a budgie, or like, oh, I once had a pet budgie, what comes to mind? What do you picture? And I find that typically when have people describe this, sometimes it's something like this, right? It's a small bird in a little cage with some seed and some water. Something like this is a very common picture. Sometimes people have seen aviaries, so they've seen something more like this. It's a large enclosure with platforms for feeding. This is also a very common picture. If you've been to zoos, sometimes zoos will have a large walk-in aviary with budgies that you can feed. So this is another thing that I hear very frequently when I ask people to describe to me what comes to mind when they think of a budgie. A lot of people tell me what they want is they picture as this. You know, I saw on social media that, you know, you can have this pet budgie and they play with you and they talk to you. Budgies do have fantastic little voices, especially the boy budgies who decide to speak. They have quite the clarity on their pronunciation. So it's pretty exciting, but this is something I hear very often. For people who already have budgies in their home that are comfortable with humans, you know that sometimes it can look a little more like this, where they do not hesitate to invite themselves into whatever you have going on, including your phone calls, your food, your water. They really will invite themselves into whatever you have to offer. But very rarely do people think of this. So I always show people this video because I want you to get an idea of the gravity of what this animal really is. I think so often we see budgies in captivity and we utterly forget what is the true nature of this animal that we have in our homes. Budgies have been in captivity compared to other parrots one of the longest, but they're still not really domesticated. So we've bred them for color, for size, for some various physical features, but the full instincts of this animal are completely wild, and that is what's inside the animal. So this is the true nature of the budgie. If you go to Australia and you see this bird in the wild, that is the real nature of the animal we're looking at. Huge flocks, very large single species flocks, extreme maneuvering on the wing, and and this is the way that they have these large social structures, or means of relating with each other. They move with each other, they drink with each other, they eat with each other, and that is the way they protect themselves against predators such as this, right? But despite that wild biology, in captivity, budgies are typically not portrayed this way. In captivity, a lot of times budgies are described as starter birds. They're described as they're easy to care for. They're great for kids. You know, you just have to change the food and water. You can get them this little cage. They're low maintenance. They're a cheap bird. We hear a lot of these types of descriptors of the budgie. And these descriptors are what has held the budgie away from being viewed for what they really are. If you think about the video you just saw and then think about this type of portrayal, it really is only their small size, the fact they're easy to breed and cheap to sell, that has made them an economically of economic interest for commercial sales. But the reality is that this characterization has nothing to do with the biology of the bird or who they really are, and has everything to do with selling them and the supplies surrounding them so that they can be of commercial interest. So what does that mean? It means that as a result, you can find budgies in pet stores almost anywhere in the world. My clients range truly from every end of the earth. I have clients in Singapore, in Japan, in Australia, Canada, Central and South America, Europe. Pretty much, I think I'm just missing, I'm still missing like Middle East, Africa, and maybe like the cold ends of the earth. But besides that, budgies are everywhere. And for less than $100, you can get a single budgie, a small cage, and a bag of food, and make your way home, right? And this is the way that they're portrayed. If you go to a large big chain pet store, you can see a setup very much like this one, and they're very frequently available for purchase. But one of the things that happens is that soon after, new owners discover what no one at the store ever warns them about. You know, they hand you this bird and they go, it's going to be great. You know, have fun. But they get home to find that A, the bird is terrified of people. The budgies in stores are typically not raised in a human home. They do not have any life skills taught to them about how to interact with humans, how to ask humans for things, how to request things. They don't have any language with the humans taught to them at a young age. So they have never seen the inside of a home, and they have never had a positive interaction with humans. So they are terrified of people. People also find that they're very messy. Budgies are parrots, just like other birds. They will distribute organic matter across your floor like it is their job, and that is because it is their job. And their role in the ecology of nature is to distribute organic matter across a distance, and they will certainly do that in your home as well. And the last thing is that despite their small size, a lot of people get told that they're quiet, and these birds are not quiet. Budgies are actually quite unlike other parrots in that they actually chatter all day long, rather than dominantly during the two large social periods, the two foraging periods a day. And if anyone's who's had budgies can tell you, they can have some serious volume. Now that I've started talking, you probably can't hear it because I have the noise canceling on, but Bino and Louie are really just contributing. And I'm sure the more that I talk and the longer that I talk, the more they contribute. But by comparison, my two cockatiels have nothing to say right now. So you will hear budgies chatter throughout the day, and they're just enjoying themselves, chattering away. That is their natural species vocalization. Compared to my two cockatiels and most other species of parrots, you're going to get that social vocalization at their two foraging periods, but you're not going to get so much ongoing chatter throughout the day. But you get a couple boy budgies, they're really going to chat up a storm. So, and as a result of this, this is the real world picture that we're seeing right now. So Kira sent me this data from the Gabriel Foundation. Small birds, including budgies, are among the highest surrendered. It's very surprising because you would think that this is a bird who's easy to take care of. They don't require much. They're cheap. They're easy. That's the way they're portrayed. It's the way they're marketed. But if you really look at the data, you see that there are small parrots everywhere. If you add up just the small parrots, so only the budgie, the cockatiel, the con of birds. We're not including the quakers and doves and pigeons yet. If you just add those up, it's more than a third of the total surrenders. And the budgies alone make up not almost 9% of that. So the budgies are being surrendered at the same rate as the Amazons, are being at least intaken into the Gabriel Foundation at the same rate as an Amazon, which tells us a lot, right? So there are a lot of these birds out there in the world, and a lot of them are being surrendered too, and a lot of them are also being lost outside. It's very, very common to find budgies outside, especially as the weather warms. Budgies have a very unique flight structure. So when you open the door, often that sound spooks them because they haven't heard it in a while. And if you don't have secondary containment on the door, so there's no barrier between where their cage is or where they are and the outside, when they spook, they will typically fly straight and towards the light, which typically is outside. Or sometimes people have the door or the window open, they forget the budgie's interested in them, so the budgie's friendly, flies over, lands on their shoulder, misses, and then ends up outside. But I would say the most common one is they get spooked while the door or the window is open, and then they end up outside. So I have 3 budgies now. 2 of them are from outside, and I never found their owner. A lot of times when people lose a budgie, it's totally understandable that a normal person wouldn't even think that bird could possibly be recovered, right? And that makes sense. If you've never seen someone recover a budgie, I can completely understand why that's the case. But besides surrenders, if we talk about budgies that are happily living with their new families, a lot of times other troubles will rear their heads later. For me, as a budgie specializing consultant, this is most of what I work on. People who have budgies that are perfectly capable of taking care of them. They're devoted and committed to taking care of this animal as a member of their family. But there are these other types of challenges that pop up that are holding their budgie back or reducing their quality of life. So these are the challenges that face them. So we see nutritional deficiencies, we see illness, because even a well-meaning family can struggle to figure out, with all the misinformation and conflicting information online, what really is a balanced diet? What is that supposed to look like? Or even if you know what that diet is, how do you get them to stop being quote addicted to their all seed diet, right? That transitional phase is something that a lot of people struggle with. So that's a very common thing that I support people through. Fear and aggression is very common. Families finding it difficult to bond with their budgies because the budgies come in with no handling experience. And so they have no life skills and no knowledge. And so it completely falls on you to teach them everything. And it requires a bit of animal communication experience to learn, how can I convey to a bird the concept of safety? I mean, it's really an interesting thing. It's an interesting question. How can I convey to a bird who does not speak this verbal language, so in physical miming language only, and some millet and some food and our physical communication, how can I communicate to this bird the abstract concept that this is a safe interaction, that I am predictable, that you can rely on me as a resource, right? That skill is something that I frequently see people get stuck with. It's one of the most common skills that I teach. And the last is high hormones at egg laying. This is very, very common. So many budgies have hormone problems. Many humans are very shocked to find out that their budgie has high hormones or is laying eggs because they did all the research. They followed all the recommendations. They did everything they were supposed to do, and this is still happening. And the reason is because of the level of misinformation, but also because, like I said before, no one's really looked at this bird. So we just kind of have a mishmash of generic recommendations out there. And the result is because no one's really looking at the factors of the biology of this bird, we will have this high hormone presentation. And we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. So how did this happen? It's not unique to budgies, but I would say budgies are the most frequent ones that you'll see as a result of it, which is that how budgies and other small parrots, they are essentially set up for failure. They, back in the day, these birds were aviary birds, and then they kind of rebranded by the marketing and commercial space to be a cage ornament in a home. And they're cheap to breed, and they can survive despite being given very little because of the way they adapted for a very harsh natural environment. So these budgies can live for years with minimal cage space and poor diet and all the nutritional deficiencies in the world. They somehow just still manage to live several years. You know, you always hear that story of someone from decades ago who had that budgie who lived to 20 years old on nothing but millet, right? And that's a super nutritionally deficient diet, and not many budgies made it. But once in a while, the, you get that one bird. It's kind of like the one human that's making it on Dr. Pepper and cigarettes, you know? So it's like the one woman who like lived to 100 on drinking Dr. Pepper and smoking every day. So it's not recommended, but once in a while you'll see a person like that, just like you'll see a budgie like that. There's a complete lack of economic incentive here. Nobody wants to put the time and effort to raise these birds the way they should be raised in a home with their life skills and communication before they go to a new home or a new flock. And the reality is a longer lived bird means selling less birds. So from an economic and financial standpoint, it's just not something the commercial space is interested in. And the third is the lack of easily available, up-to-date expertise. Because there seems to be no financial incentive, nobody thinks, oh yeah, I want to be a budgie expert when I grow up. Like usually people look at me and they're like, you do what? I tell them I'm a parrot behavior consultant, and they're like, a parent? Do you have children? I'm like, no, not that kind. Like, not that kind. But yeah, like every time I, you know, nobody thinks that I'm going to do that when I grow up because it's a job that doesn't exist, right? I self-assign myself this job. I just decided, and I'm like, all right, here I am. So the field has needed this for a long time. Budgies have a lot of scientific studies, much more than many other species because they are small and because we could have them in a research environment. So we actually have a lot more data on this bird, but bridging that gap between the science and the care and the popular sharing of care recommendations, nobody has wanted to stand in that gap because you needed a very widely trained scientist who also is willing to do public communication and consulting. It's a very challenging place to stand in terms of skill set, and nobody up until now has really wanted to do it, not for this species at least. So how do we fix this? How do we change the game for these birds and for us, right? To me, the answer is simple. And this is the same thing that I teach my community. It's the same thing that I teach my clients. And it's that it's not so much about the tactics. It's more about understanding the budgie and their real needs, not the one that we as a human species project onto them. And by really seeing them for who they really are, we're able to build a successful life together where we mutually benefit from the connection. A lot of times when I ask people why they want to have budgies, I usually hear, like, I saw it on social media. Like, look, they're so cute. Of course, they are so cute. Look at their little face, right? I said they have the funny little voice, and they do have a funny little voice. Bino Bino says, love you. And he says, Bino Bino. Louis says, like, beep, beep, bird. It's pretty funny. I have to admit, it is hilarious. But I usually posit to people, I said, do you think it's maybe because you want a connection with nature? That this bird represents a true connection that we have with nature. And I usually tell my clients, I said, well, if we want to bring this bird into our home because it's a connection to nature, then we should connect. And we connect by looking at the bird for who they really are, their real needs, understanding their real biology, and meeting their needs that way. And in turn, we benefit from this connection. And it becomes the connection to nature that you didn't even know you were looking for. And that's typically, I told this to my community a few weeks back, and people were like, oh, is that the secret of the Budgie Academy? And I was like, yeah, that's the secret of the Budgie Academy. You come to me so I can teach your bird to step up, and then you find a connection to nature and a journey to loving this little bird. And that's really the big secret, the big secret of what the Budgie Academy is really up to. So uncovering the truth. If it's about connection and connecting to nature and finding out who this bird really is, then who is this budgie? What really is a budgie under these myths that are being sold to you? And it all comes down to this. Everything you see, I mean literally everything you see your budgie doing is an expression of their wild behavior in a home environment. So every behavior and every need is a piece of this puzzle. This bird has lived successfully in one of the harshest conditions on this planet. The conditions they live in Australia are highly unpredictable. They do not have yearly seasons, yearly breeding seasons. They have seasons that run multiple years or over decades. So it's highly unpredictable, survivalist, harsh. They fly 50 kilometers from one food area to the next, highly nomadic, highly migratory. It is a harsh, harsh world. But they manage it. These birds are perfectly, precisely evolved. So everything that they do, from their behavior to their reproductive schematic to their social interactions, everything is part of this picture that has evolved to allow them to live in this place. And that is the bird that we see in the home. So let's look at an example together. This is a very classic example of some quote quirky behaviors that are not just quirky behaviors. This is one of my clients. So she sent me this video and asked me, what is my budgie doing? This I offer for people. It's called a behavior snapshot. And what she's doing is she's cavity seeking. This is the nesting behavior. This is an early sign of high hormones that often gets discounted as a quirky behavior. But what she's doing is, in the wild, she would find a tree cavity and empty that tree cavity and make it a nest site. But now they're expressing it in the home. They're looking for some dark cavity-like thing, and they've chosen that your couch is about the closest thing they can find to that criteria. And so she's emptying out the stuff from inside the couch. And this bird actually will be territorial and guard this location in the couch as well. So this is a real expression of a wild behavior in a home environment. But a lot of times this type of behavior can easily get discounted as always just a quirk, when in reality, this is an early sign of high hormones. And then 6 months or a year later, they come to me and they say, oh my God, Amy, like this bird is a chronic egg layer. And we'll talk more about later why that's not actually real. A lot of times people ask me, how do you know a budgie is a chronic egg layer? And I'm like, none of them are chronic egg layers. And that's the biggest reveal and the secret of budgie hormones. So I thought we'd talk about some myths of what's being portrayed to you, what this budgie is and what they really are. So if you're thinking about getting a budgie, or you have budgies now, we can learn a little bit about what they really are. So the most common myth number one, you walk into the pet store, they hand you a bag of seed and they're like, good luck to you, right? Budgies are seed eaters, therefore they only need seed in their diet. They give you this bag of seed and tell you you're good. Once in a while, they can, maybe if they're lucky, you can give them a leaf of lettuce to gnaw on, and that's all they have. But the reality is that this bird has very unique needs. One of the reasons we see so many different health issues in parrots is because we're not properly matching their nutritional needs. Budgies are very unique. They are different from the jungle parrots. They're different from the New World rainforest parrots like the macaw or the Amazon, or even another small parrot like the parrotlet, for example. That's a very different animal. This is a low calcium specializing small granivore. So while they do specialize in granivores and they don't need as much calcium as, say, an African gray, they do have a very specific array of nutritional needs. They are still a parrot. They evolved from the same ancestor. and they share the majority of their nutritional needs with other parrots. So that is the same way an all-seed diet is mismatched for the nutritional needs of other parrots. The budgie is also not getting their nutritional needs met by an all-seed diet. This is why we often see budgies with respiratory infections, because seeds have almost no vitamin A precursors, and vitamin A is required for them to form a full immune system. And so because they have so much surface area of their respiratory system constantly exchanging with air with the outside, that's where they get exposed the most, and their immune system is low. That's why they get respiratory infections. So it's very common to see parrots with respiratory infections because of a lack in the diet. Another common one, high hormones, for example, is a very common one with it's like another side effect of the nutritional needs not being met. So a lot of different categories there. Budgies that are both overweight and underweight are both having the same problem. The all-seed diet does not provide the right protein, so the budgie starts to break down its own muscle to get the crucial proteins it needs. So a lot of times you'll see all-seed diet birds who are quite skinny and they're told, oh, we'll just feed them more millet. It's not solving the problem. What they need is high quality protein so they can build their muscle back. I had a budgie named Callie that I adopted years ago who was so thin. She was so thin, and she was eating an all-seed diet, a crazy caloric excess, so much extra calories, and yet she was thin as a stick. And the moment we fixed her diet, she poofed back up to this shiny little bird. It's really cute. These budgies also have uniquely low calcium requirements for growth and non-breeding times, but when they go into breeding, they have the same elevated calcium needs as the other parrots. So this is one of the challenges of these birds. You really need to be able to know when your budgie is in non-breeding versus breeding, so you know to monitor the calcium levels in your diet and change it accordingly. These birds do not handle the wide range of calcium that the other birds do because they're living on lower calcium foods, so they extract a lot more calcium. But the flip side of that is that you see a lot of these birds, if you feed them what would be a quote, quote, normal amount of calcium that's perfectly suitable for an Amazon or a parrotlet or any other bird, the budgie will start to have kidney issues very early on, as early as 28 days of age. So barely at 1 month old, they haven't even left the nest yet. And there are studies showing that if you overfeed them calcium, they will already start getting the very early signs of kidney failure. So a lot of times when we go to avian clinics, you see so many of these small granivores. Budgies, cockatiels, lovebirds. And one of the extra tidbits here is that macaws also have a lower calcium requirement than other parrots. So that's why you see a lot of macaws with kidney issues as well. So that's why a lot of this, there's a longer scientific story behind this, because a lot of times this gets misattributed to excessive protein, and the data, they debunked that decades ago. But for some reason, that myth is just the gift that keeps on giving. But the data for calcium is so strong. I'm not sure why this just keeps floating around. And they're high social eaters. Like other parrots, budgies are highly social. They require parallel activity, like group eating. It's one of their main forms of socialization and is their main tool in learning to eat new foods. Kira and I were talking about before, when you get new budgies in, if your other budgies are already eating a full balanced diet, there's not really much of a process to their conversion anymore. They look at the other budgies and they go, what are you eating? Oh, you're eating that? I'm eating that. And so one of the core skills that I teach people for diet conversion is, we'll start the process of diet conversion, but the key thing is I want to start building the relationship with you and your bird so we can leverage you as the social eater to lead the bird to your daily 2 foraging periods of social eating. It's a lot easier to introduce fresh foods and things like that to your budgie when you create that, I call it a feeding frenzy type situation, right? You saw the wild budgies before, that is the way they move, that is the way they eat. So if you got 4 other budgies eating this, your one new budgie will not ask questions and just eat whatever they eat. So when I have new budgies come in now, I just keep an eye on them and make sure they're eating, but they typically would take one look at the other budgie and they're like, what is she eating? And they don't ask questions. They just go ahead and eat. And it's because that's their natural biology. I always tell people, you want to work with the biology. Work smarter, not harder. It'll fit for the bird, it'll fit for you. The bird gets their needs met, and it was easy for us. Right. Common myth number 2, that budgies are not as smart as other parrots, because they're so small. Like, how can they possibly know things, right? That they they cannot be trained unless they're hand raised. If they're not hand raised or they're not young enough, they're just, it's a done deal. You simply can't bond with these animals anymore. A lot of times people will ask me, how old does a budgie have to be before it can't be trained anymore? And I usually tell them, well, 2 of the budgies in my house, I have not the slightest clue how old they are. So can I train them or not? Right. And like, are they trainable? I don't know. Right. So it doesn't actually matter. And that's really what it comes down to. These birds are highly social, highly intelligent. And a lot of times people will describe budgies as shy, which I find very funny. Anyone who has a budgie who's friendly enough or like comfortable with humans and has life skills will tell you that that is the last descriptor we use for the personality of this species. These birds are highly forward, very gregarious, and they're a full parrot. They have the same social intelligence as other parrots that allows them to navigate that large flock, understand who's who, who's resourced, who's not, who do I follow, how do we stay safe, how do we relate to each other. When you have these types of social animals, it requires a certain level of intelligence. Budgies can also build relationships with you, just like any other parrot. It comes down to your skill set. They can learn as well as you can teach. And a lot of times people ask me, well, how fast does it take, or how long does it take to train your budgie? I said, as long as it takes for you to become a good enough teacher. If you can teach it, they can learn it. And typically when I do my series, my consulting series for my clients, I usually tell them, I said, it's really a matter of your learning curve. So just take your time. We'll slowly teach you the skill. And as you get the skill, these budgies will build a relationship with you. And what's very interesting is because they stay with me in the community after, when they get new budgies next time, now they already have the skill, and these budgies build a relationship super fast because now they already have that teaching skill. They know how to bridge the knowledge gap for this bird, pave the learning path for this bird. Budgies are very forward. Anyone who has a budgie who's not afraid of people will tell you that the moment that you teach them that you are available as a resource and as a companion, they will absolutely access that resource and access that companion. So a good example is I had a client with a budgie named Laser Pit. And Laser Pit was very shy. She would just sit in the back of the cage like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, guys, I don't know if I can deal with this human. And I said, instead of just coming and trying to give her millet, show her that she has agency in this situation. So she actually had 2 budgies. So I said, work with the other budgie. And then, of course, Laser Pit was like, what are you doing? I want to eat with that budgie. I said, when she starts trying to get your attention, then give her some millet. When she tries to get your attention, reinforce that behavior, give her some millet. Very quickly, within 24 hours, this budgie started learning to do that all the time. That, hey, this bird went from please don't look at me, because she would approach the cage and she would just run to the back of the cage, to standing at the front of the cage, knocking on the cage door, trying to get the person's attention. And it's because it's purely a matter of information and communication, of safety and predictability. This budgie learned that this person is responsive, this person is safe, and within 24 hours immediately flipped their behavior because it's not inherent to their personality. They just don't know that it's safe. They don't know that information. But once you communicate it to them, they will not hesitate to use it. And as a result, if we understand how they learn, we use smart techniques, we can build a relationship with them. You don't need to grab them, use the force, wait until they get used to it. Stick your hand in the cage and wait until they get used to it. This is a flooding technique. It's, to me, the slowest, and besides just causing the animal a lot of stress, you get the worst training outcome on our side. If we were just selfish for a second, you get the worst training outcome because the bird never learns to initiate with you. You want a bird who comes to seek you out, who comes to play with you. When they know they want to play, they come and ask you, hey, can we play? I want a bird like that. I want a bird who knows. Bino does a funny up and down dance when he wants something. So he flies over and he does his up and down dance at me. I'm like, okay, we're doing things. Here's your rubber ducky. We can talk about things. The last thing is that people often get told that budgies are easy to care for. You just buy this little cage, some seeds, some water, like you're all good, right? And you don't have to worry about all this other stuff like the large parrots do. They can, if something goes wrong, they'll pluck their feathers, they'll scream if they bite you, or they have all these behavioral problems. So this budgie would be easy to care for, right? But the budgie is a parrot. It is a full parrot in every sense of the word. It is a very unique parrot because of their small size, enabling them to swarm in that way. So their movement pattern is quite different than you'll see from other parrots. Even another bird that, a small parrot that travels in flocks, like a cockatiel, for example, they don't quite swarm the same way. The movement pattern is a little bit different. But they have a full set of parrot behaviors. Like I said I would talk about the budgies and their breeding. Budgies are highly opportunistic breeders. There's a lot of implications to this term about what it means. But this is why so many budgies get labeled as chronic egg layers, as if this one is broken, this one has some kind of illness, and they're a chronic egg layer. In reality, they're just highly opportunistic. That's what they evolved for in the wild. In the wild, it's many years before a favorable breeding season comes, and it's not always one breeding season long. Sometimes it's one season long, sometimes it's two back-to-back breedings long, sometimes it's even longer, and you get these bursts. I think it was some years ago, within the last decade, we had a year of just ample rain. And ample rain in a desert environment brings huge food supply, and there was a ginormous boom of budgies. But that's a big boom that year, and then dry years after that. So these highly opportunistic breeders is how they learn to survive. And so that chronic egg laying is just a response to high triggers in the home. Budgies are capable of aggression. Of course, it hurts a lot less when a budgie bites you than a large parrot like a macaw or a cockatoo, but it's still no fun. And a lot of times people feel like, oh, it's, I'll just deal with it. But remember, aggression is a space increasing behavior, meaning that the bird is asking you to get away from them or they're not comfortable with something. So for their welfare, we can do a lot better by preventing that aggression. And they're a lot more fun when you have a budgie who's really in tune with you because you've built that communication and you've built that relationship, and the biting becomes completely unnecessary. You'll see some very interesting, fun behaviors. They will relate to you more. They'll seek you out more. They will play with you more. They'll talk to you more. It's because now you're at a very high rate of positive associations rather than a mixed bag of sometimes positive and sometimes negative. And of course, all the other behavior challenges that we see in parrots, we do see in budgies. This is a huge part of what I do. Budgies can feather damage, just like other large parrots. A lot of people think that budgies don't, but they have the same risk factors and the same presentation. The signs are the same. The way to resolve it is the same. Because this is a full parrot. It's just that for budgies, they tend to have enough of their early life upbringing, so their risk factor prevalence is not quite the same as like a large cockatoo, for example. Budgies naturally fledge in the wild at 4 weeks, and typically in pet stores, they get to stay with their parents until 4 weeks. These larger macaws, cockatoos, they're supposed to stay with their parents a year, and they're weaning them at 6 months. And so that's a huge, huge contributor to the risk factor for feather damaging. But we do see feather damaging in budgies, and the presentation is exactly the same. So that's who the budgie really is. So I want to tell you guys some stories of hope and happiness of what happens when we really connect. When I first started the Budgie Academy, everyone told me nobody would do this, Amy. Like nobody would spend, 3 months learning this skill set from you about how to interact with your budgie, let alone, spend all this time. I do a live every Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. and I've been doing it for at least 3 years now. And I was very shocked to find that the numbers of attendance continue to grow. And the same people, they come every week and we talk for 2 hours every week about some intricate part of this journey and this connection. And it truly is. It's as deep as you want to go in this journey of being a budgie person, it will take you. So here's a story of hope. This is Azuki. So Azuki still holds the record in my practice for the most number of eggs laid in her life before coming to me as a budgie. I have one cockatiel that's giving her a run for her money. But she was purchased by her owner when she was 8 months old. By the time she was 2 years old, she had laid more than 50 eggs. In 2023, she had laid 36 eggs total in that year. In October of 2023 or November of 2023, Azuki came to me as a case. her owner approached me and said, hey, I have this bird. I'm really worried about her. But this is a classic quote, quote, chronic egg laying case. And she had done everything that was recommended. But the science was not right. And because the science was not right, it was not being solved. So I looked at her case, we did an evaluation, we made all the adjustments. And she told me that, Amy, I want more than anything an egg-free 2024. And she got her egg-free 2024. And as you can see, it's almost May of 2026. And she remains egg-free to this day. Every couple months, usually my clients give me like a monthly update. And then after some time, I get like a quarterly update. Then it's like a 6-month update. Then it's like a yearly update. So now it's like once a year. She's like, it's still good, still no eggs. I'm like, okay, great, thumbs up. And everything's been great. So Azuki is a sweetheart. But this is a bird who was labeled as broken. Oh, well, it's a budgie. That's just how they are. Budgies just have hormone problems, and you're just gonna have to live with it. And no, if we look at their biology for who they really are, look at their real biology, we see that the science is there, the biology is there, the data is there. And if you apply it correctly, you can have an amazing outcome. These birds are not broken, they're not confused, they are just expressing their normal biology. So let's do a story of hope from a more behavior side rather than hormone side. We can build amazing relationships. Miss Brumby is actually here in Massachusetts. She was found outside, and she spent more than 2 years, I think, in her new home. And she wasn't quite able to fully interact with her humans. She wasn't terrified, but she could like once a month, maybe she like stepped up once for like a second, right? So they wanted a better life for her. They wanted her to be able to access more, interact with them more, go places in the home rather than just stay in that little area in her cage. So we built out the furniture in their home, a new routine that matches her natural biology, new bird stand, new budgie-friendly furniture, and also new life skills. So she knew how to fly to her humans, when to expect, what's safe to land on, what's safe to stand on, what can she expect at what time. And Miss Brumby has now decided that the laptop is a fantastic place to get her proximity and social needs met while her humans work. They eat breakfast and dinner together every day in the living room. She eats on her little stand right next to the couch and coffee table, and they eat at the coffee table. We all sit together and eat breakfast, and we all sit together and eat dinner every day, and she gets her needs met. And because she's been included as part of the social system, all of these other behaviors come naturally. And that's really the key of what I teach people in this type of situation. I didn't have to teach this behavior. We didn't have to teach this behavior. We build the base environment, and the budgie will start to find ways to look for proximity to you. And that's what you're looking for. So most people want. I want a budgie who wants to be near me, right? I don't want to have to like go over there and stick my hand in the cage and force the bird. I want them to come seek me out because they feel like it, right? So this is a really fun story, but this is a very, very common story when I do my training series. So this is my take-home message. As a very biased budgie person, that's totally not objective. Being a budgie person can be the journey of a lifetime. I've had budgies since 2014. And a lot of times people will ask me like, oh, Amy, don't you want bigger birds? My first work with birds actually started with birds of prey. I started with falcons and hawks and owls and such. But ever since I got budgies, I was like, this is my jam. This is my thing. I love these birds. And I propose that if you're willing to see them for who they really are and let them see you, really being a budgie person can be the connection to nature you've been looking for or didn't even know you wanted. And it can be the journey of a lifetime. And I think that's really if you only learn one thing from me, that's what I hope becomes a new option for you on how you see this bird and how you see the budgie, rather than just a small cage ornament and that's all they're capable of. A lot of times, like I've had owners who were told like they're perfectly capable of doing more. One of my favorite stories is one of my clients named Rita. She had an 8-year-old budgie. She had it for many years, and she was told that that's all her budgie could be. Her budgie would never be able to interact with humans because she found her outside. She was already multiple years old. There's just nothing you can do. Like, that's just the most she'll ever be. And she happened to find me on TikTok, happened to watch one of the videos about training, and she started providing the bird with the reinforcement, the communication in a way the bird could understand. And she changed completely. She could interact with people, she could step up, she could go places. And so a lot of times I think it's the rhetoric around budgies is actually holding the people back. People want more, people care about these birds. um, you'll find my content, I quite dislike the general rhetoric of like the online parrot world. There's a lot of blaming and shaming of and judgment of you're not doing enough, you're not sacrificing an arm and leg enough for your bird. When in reality, my view is that every client who's ever come to me is caring, loving, cares about their bird to most. People told me that nobody would ever care this much about a little bird that, forget a $25 bird. I'd say a good amount of my clients got the bird for free and found them outside or was given the bird. The bird cost them nothing, but they truly want to live a life with this bird. They want a lifetime journey with this bird. It's a family member in every sense of the word, and they want to give them a real seat at the table of their life. And it's really exciting. And it doesn't matter how much that bird costs initially to acquire. And it doesn't matter how small that bird is. So that's all I have for you guys today. Acknowledgements, thank you to the Gabriel Foundation for having me, especially I didn't know this was our first webinar of the year. So thank you guys for having me. And thank you to Kira for especially for organizing and helping me think about what you guys might enjoy as a talk. It's hard sometimes for me to tell because I spend so much time talking about the nitty gritty, and it's so vast that sometimes honing what is worth sharing and providing the right information is always something to think about. So thank you to Kira for guiding me on what you think people would enjoy. And yeah, if we have time, let's do some questions. And if you have any other questions, feel free to message me on Instagram. Definitely on Instagram and not on TikTok because the messaging system is much better on Instagram. But yeah, if there's any questions that we don't get to answer now, you can always message me and just let me know that you have this question left over from the webinar. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And
I have some questions here.
okay.
First of all, thank you so much. Love the presentation. I just think this is a really great way to start getting into just more budgie education.
Mm-hmm.
For everyone that's watching, we've talked a lot about what more kind of content we could have out there just because there's so much to cover. It's so difficult to cover everything within such a small period of time when it comes to egg laying, when it comes to diet, when it comes to enrichment, when it comes to cage setups, behavior and training, all of these things. So the hope is going forward is that we'll have more information to share with you guys, and more in depth on some of these like very specific topics. So if there's anything that you guys want to hear more about or learn more about, you can definitely shoot me an email or put it in the comments here. I'll probably be posting some like call for ideas and things like that. So
Yeah.
if there's anything that you guys think of, please let us know. And we'd love to like dive deeper into it. Um, let's see, some of the questions here, I think we've talked a little bit about. Our first question that we had was someone has two budgies. One was from a rescue, and then the other one was purchased from a store to keep that bird company. Um, they say that the bird is understandably cautious of us. Or it says, I think it's the female is more cautious, or maybe. Hmm. Or the male is more cautious, and then the female is taking cues from her male bird. They say not terrified, but definitely keep their distance and move to the other side of the cage when we're near.
Yeah.
They had budgies, this question, when they were younger that were very social, sat on the head, arm, glasses, all of that. And they
Yeah.
ask, is there any way that I could make these budgies more loving pets instead of prisoners? I
Yes.
think that you've definitely talked a little bit about that,
Mm-hmm.
of reinforcing when these birds are soliciting for attention and avoiding flooding behaviors and things like that. Would you have any advice for someone that is kind of at this stage with their
Yeah.
budgies of like Are you starting with like protected contact reinforcement or let's see, like just offering treats and kind of walking away? Um, what would you think would be like the first steps that you might recommend for this person?
Yeah. The first steps for this, the key about understanding training a budgie in this situation is that um, taking the budgie from where they are now to being comfortable with humans is a stack of life skills. So that's essentially what we're trying to provide to this bird, right? Is life skills. It's kind of like if you couldn't drive a car, you wouldn't be able to access a lot of resources, right? And if you go out on the road, you'd be like, oh, this is really scary because I don't know how to drive a car. I've not been given any of these life skills. With your budgie, it's very much the same. So we stack the life skills as such. It's very different than a larger parrot. The primary difference is larger parrots are usually hand fed in today's day and age. So they come in with some understanding that the human could possibly be a source of anything that they desire. But budgies are raised in this cage environment. The only thing they've ever experienced is people coming in, taking the papers, moving the food and water. You know, a lot of these birds are raised in bird mills. So these birds have only ever experienced their behavior can never control the human's behavior. They do not have that perception that that is possible. So because they have no agency or choice, their fear level is super high. So the first thing I always teach is to teach this bird that they have agency in the situation, that I am responsive to their body language cues. So whatever they already can do, if when they first start, if they can't even take millet, and one of the first things that they'll show you is that if you offer millet or you slowly approach the cage and they back away from you, they're showing me that their most important priority is space away from you. And so if that's the case, then that is what we provide. One of the interesting things about using one of the newest approaches in animal behavior is the constructional approach. It's really understanding how to construct the life skill rather than saying, don't do this or don't do that, only do this and only do that. It's understanding the root of the behavior. So if let's say I approach at a distance where the budgie is still not retreating, they would typically look around. I would stop there and they would think about it. If they give me a behavior that I find desirable, then we would give them the reinforcer they want, which is to retreat. Versus, let's say with laser pit would, when we would feed the other budgie, laser pit would come over and be like, hello, right? And she would knock on the bowl, the rim of the bowl, to get the human to come and give her millet too. So I said, wait till she knocks on the bowl and then give her some millet. And then now what she does is the cage is right next to her desk. During random times of the day, she'll just stand at the edge and go like clink, clink, and look. And like clink, clink, and look. And I'm like, all right. So she has a drawbridge, like a door that comes down like this. And I said, in the morning, eat breakfast with her. So from there, we start creating the social environment. So I would say that the two things to think about is you want to set yourself up for success by having the right housing, the right perching set up the right way. Sometimes the way the perches are set up will fight you if you're not setting them up the right way. So like you can see this one's a little hard to see, but there's like the high perches in the back, and there's always this perch in the front, the one that Bino is standing on. And I have a perch that runs that back one to the front one. Because a lot of times people are putting their hand in the cage to work with the bird, and the bird's like backed up against the back, like, I don't know about this, right? So wherever the bird is, the first thing we start doing is teaching them responsive, teaching them that they can have some agency. And then I ask them to come forward. And really all their base life skills is built from a singular concept of, if you request interaction, if you come forward, show me you want interaction, I will provide you reinforcement. And we extrapolate that out to target, to walking recall, to flying recall, because that's what it is, right? You decide to come to me, I reinforce. It's the same concept, and we extrapolate that. So it's very doable, but it's a matter of stacking that information skill by skill, skill by skill, skill by skill, with consistency, knowing what to do, what not to do. But yeah, definitely the caging, the properly assessing where your bird is, and finding and teaching them that responsiveness. Because Larger parrots come in knowing that you're responsive. You may not like what they're responsive to. This is why a lot of times with bigger parrots, you get screaming issues because um, when they make nice sounds, nobody does anything. But when they scream, suddenly everybody responds. So they start learning through that kind of reinforcement, and people accidentally end up with a screaming issue, which is really easy to resolve. But yeah, the things I would say, the main thing that holds people back from that, even an experienced parrot trainer would struggle with budgies, because there's an additional gap that you would not see with a hand-fed bird. That gap where they have no concept at all that you could possibly that they could possibly have any control over you is utterly not in there. And so can we communicate that very abstract concept by being responsive is the first obstacle to get over. When you can get over that first one, the rest is teaching target, walking, recall, the step up, all the things. Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I'm at right now of like we have so much experience with larger birds here.
Yeah.
And when we get these like terrified little budgies in, I just feel like a giant monster. I
Yep.
feel like the big scary monster that comes in, changing the papers. They're scared of me going in the cage with the food bowls. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I've started is working in the small approximations
Yep.
of just like offering non-contingent reinforcement and then doing the protected contact reinforcement when they seem
Oh.
more open to interacting. I have
Mm-hmm.
really long millet sprigs that have
Yeah.
really long stem so I can hold it from my desk and like just let them take it because they're not comfortable taking it from my hand. Or
Yeah.
even if it's longer and I'm holding it kind of far away, it's
Mm-hmm.
still being held by me. So I use the
Yep.
really long ones and then we work towards the smaller ones. And it's
Yep.
definitely a process. But it's
Yeah.
so nice when you can just see them
Mm-hmm.
relax and
Oh
not be so
yeah, like
terrified.
it's so true. Like it's all about like how do I physically communicate this abstract like concepts
I
and
am
the
safe.
the
Yeah.
predictable sequence. Like this is, and it's that predictability. The sequence is this way, it's always this way. You know, if we teach target, what is the purpose of us teaching target? It's not because I just really like it when they touch this random stick, right? It's to give them a platform of predictability to stand on. They're like, oh, if I touch a stick, I always get millet. This is what always happens. I don't have to worry something else is going to happen. And every time I can expect that this is the way the human will interact with me. And so they're going to be much more willing to come forward, right? Compared to when they come forward and they don't have any certainty. So from there, we start to build more loops, more skills, more behaviors. Like this funny story about Louis. Louis gets a Nutriberry when he goes back to the cage. So the other day I was standing there and I tried to put him back in the cage like this, and he would kind of fly off. And I kind of stood there, but he would fly like right on top of the cage and he wasn't going anywhere. So I looked at him and I realized that day, because my throat kind of hurt, I was just doing things and not talking. I wasn't saying the cue that normally I say. But I had trained them, the cue is you want to go back. And because I say you want to go back, and then I put the millet in there, I put the Nutriberry in there. So because I wasn't giving the cue, he was like, "Are you going to put the Nutriberry in?"
Yeah.
And the
Where's my
moment I said, like, you want to go back, like, boom, in the cage he went. Like, that was kind of a funny moment because I was like, we do this every day. And he was like, immediately, I was like, you want to go back? And he went. So that was really cute.
so funny. And see, like, that's one of the things we hear so common is people want a larger bird because they're more interactive or they're more intelligent, more social, all of these things. But I mean, that's such a great example of they contextualize things the same way that any other parrot does.
Yes.
It's just about
Everything.
getting them comfortable and getting them to that
Mhm.
point where they're able to express that. That's so
It's pretty
funny.
funny. One of my first clients ever, she had many large parrots before she got budgies. So she had large parrots. She was done with having the large parrots. Some of them passed with natural causes. And then she took a break from having birds. And then she got these budgies and she was like, oh my God, these budgies just sit there all day and don't do anything. Like these birds are so boring. And we started working together and these birds just came alive. And she was like, oh my God, like this is a whole parrots. And she was like, this is an entire parrot. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly. This is a whole bird. This is an entire parrot here. They're just that big.
Well, sometimes we get questions of people don't realize that parrot is like the encompassing term for all of these different species under that. So people sometimes don't even realize that budgies are parrots,
Yeah.
or they won't think that a cockatoo is a parrot because they have all of the different species names. And I'm like, well, technically they're all parrots. They're all
Yeah.
just very, very different.
Mhm.
Let's see. So we have a lot of questions about the egg laying behavior.
Yes, I'll help with the egg laying.
Yes. So one of the questions is, when a budgie already begins egg laying, what do you do to mitigate this and get them through safely
Mhm.
without allowing the eggs to be born? Um, that's a very big question because I think this is such a big and complex topic. Um, I mean, I would say like looking at the environment first and seeing what kinds of factors are potentially playing into this egg laying behavior would kind of be where I would start at least.
Mhm.
Um, because like you had so many examples of like the cavity seeking, the malnutrition, too many fats in the diet, things like that. All of those different factors can play in, and many times it's going to be more than one thing that
It
is
is, yep.
affecting this behavior. So what do you typically look at first when you're looking at these behaviors?
Yeah, this is where I started when I first started dealing with this with Fitzy. So a couple things. When a budgie's in non-breeding, they have very low calcium needs. But when they go to breeding, they have the same breeding level calcium needs as the other parrots. So you have to match that to prevent the egg binding. So if your budgie typically has about 4 eggs worth of calcium in their bones, if they had good calcium status before. But if they were hormonal the whole time, when they come into high hormones to prepare for the potential of egg laying, they are mobilizing calcium out of their bones. So if they've been in high hormones a really, really long time, they've been mobilizing that calcium out of their bones a long time. So they don't have a lot of calcium if you haven't been supplying a good calcium supplied diet. So first thing is, if I get a budgie that comes to me who's already laying, I need to see the calcium and the D3 and the quality of the diet. At least the calcium and D3 has to get up to the breeding level. And then I want to make sure the rest of it is also good. The protein quality is good. They're getting enough calories because you just got to get them through this clutch and make sure they don't get an egg binding. For not wanting to hatch the eggs, you can candle them just to make sure they might not even be fertile, right? So you can candle them and see if they're even fertile. If they're not fertile, then you don't have to worry about it. Depending on the presentation of the bird, sometimes I will put a nest box and let them sit on it so they stop laying because budgies are tactile based indeterminate layers. This sounds like a lot of words, but basically it means they can feel how many eggs they have. And some budgies, if they're hormonal enough, if they don't have any eggs, they will keep laying in order to replace the eggs. So you really want to see based on the bird situation. In most cases, if the bird just drops an egg and doesn't seem to care about it, just leave the egg there and we fix the diet and environment situation. On the trigger side, while you keep the calcium on board, I would typically keep the calcium on board even after the bird stops laying for at least another 30 days. You have to replenish what this bird has lost. But the other thing is that when I first started, there was not really a well-defined list of triggers and definitely not a manifestation of triggers. It was kind of like a bit vague. Um, my list of triggers is now defined as a list of 8. So it's metabolizable energy of the diet, temperature, humidity, presence of a pair bonded mate, physical and vocal stimulation by a pair bonded mate, ability to cavity seek, presence of a nest site, and the total relative abundance of excess food. So there's a big difference between knowing how much your budgie eats, feeding that much and a little extra and making sure they're eating enough versus just like a pile of excess, like excessive excess food that has nothing to do with how much they need to eat, right? So all of these different factors pieced together, if you can properly address all these factors, they will stop egg laying. So a lot of it, what's one of the funny things, because a lot of times you'll notice that day length is not on the list, which is one of the most surprising things. We did this study in UC Davis years ago, not we, but I mean we as a human species. Um, the Clasing Lab did this study years ago in UC Davis that budgies are not responsive to day length in the same way as chickens, songbirds, quail, and it makes perfect sense. They're opportunistic breeders. If every year when the sunlight got long, they got hormonal, but there was no food and no water, that is a terrible time to be breeding. It's a dangerous thing to happen to this animal. So they have evolved a completely different set of factors. And what's really interesting is that if you look at other parrots, they have also similar factors. The difference is that these parrots that are from the dry area, like budgies, cockatiels, they like borks, like red-rumped parakeets, like this kind of like small Australian granivore from these dry areas, they respond to humidity. But if you had a conure, a macaw, you're probably not going to get a humidity response quite the same way, which makes perfect sense, right? So if you can control those different factors, time it right, make sure you get the diet, the two levels, the non-breeding level and the breeding level correct. A lot of times people are scared, so they just keep the calcium high the whole time. And they're not managing that biology correctly. So when you get that biology managed right, you can handle that. But yeah, if the eggs are fertile, you can't sterilize them. You can freeze them. But
We will shake them here if we
yeah,
have the eggs that are potentially fertilized. You can shake them because we also will allow some of our birds to sit on the eggs. A follow-up question, do they have a specific like clutch period or clutch number, like an
yeah,
average clutch number
yeah,
and
it's
then
like
a
4 to
clutch
8.
time? That's a lot. That's
I
a
know. And the incubation, I think something is like 18 to 21 days or something like that.
okay. Got
So typically it's tricky because for some budgies, if you're a lot of people will get dummy eggs. I will say in my experience, it's better you shake or sterilize the egg and put the egg back because
Mhm.
the texture and the shape of dummy eggs that are on the market right now, they're very smooth and they're very slippery. And because budgies are tactile, indeterminate layers. I tested this with Fitzy years ago. When I replaced her eggs with dummy eggs, she struggled to kind of keep them under her. And so she wasn't getting the tactile stimulation she was looking for. So she laid more eggs than had I just replaced it with her actual sterilized eggs. That was a long time ago. Now I know how to handle it much more advanced because it's been like 4 years since then, probably even longer now. Oh my God, I'm getting old. But as I've consulted on more and more and more birds, my ability to control the egg laying is becoming more and more refined as well, which is really interesting. I think over the, like, I don't know, hundreds of budgies I've seen, like a slice of them are all high hormone cases. And then a portion of those are male and a portion of them are female. But of the egg laying ones, yeah, slowly we're getting increasingly more refined with the way that we're able to address it. But the most important thing is you have to guard that bird's bone density because if they get an egg binding, that is the most dangerous thing. One of the reasons Azuki was able to live so long with all the egg laying is because they kept her calcium status high. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's the most important thing.
And I would recommend if anyone hasn't watched, Amy did a webinar with, was it Phoenix Landing?
Yeah.
About how internal biology becomes external behavior. And I think you talk a lot about some of these hormonal triggers in that webinar
Yeah.
specifically. So I think if anyone would like more in-depth, like scientific information
Yeah.
about this topic specifically, I would highly, highly recommend the webinar that Amy did with Phoenix Landing. It is really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. That one is more like sciencey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's why I liked it. It was like data, facts.
So yeah, there's a lot more sciencey thoughts. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Some of the other questions that we have in here are about diet.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. This question says, if pellets didn't exist, what would be the ideal budgie diet?
Yeah, this is such a good question. So the key to diet, a lot of times people are fixated on like, is it this food or that food, this pellet or that pellet? But think if you understand actual the science of nutrition, this is the situation we are in. We had this parrot that was living out in the wild. They are burning a huge amount of calories every single day. The flying burns a lot of calories. So they are eating a pretty substantial amount of food. What we've done by taking them into the home environment or a captive environment is they are now burning much less calories per day. They're not doing these huge flights anymore. So the total calorie burn is really, really low. But the problem is that the proteins and essential fats, vitamins, and mineral needs have not changed. So what we've essentially done is in the wild, the budgies were eating this much food in order to meet all of those requirements. And because they could burn all of that calories, they could meet that much protein, vitamins, minerals, even though the food outside was not that dense. It's the same relative density as what we have in captivity. But because they could eat a lot more, because they were burning all the calories. So what we've done, the funny thing is humans are having the same problem that by putting us into this type of environment, reducing the caloric output, the birds are also not eating nearly as much. They're eating half or a third of the volume per day. But their proteins, vitamins, minerals needs have not changed. So now we've put ourselves into a problem. So we've created a problem where there is no food that fits that profile. So that's the problem that exists above all this. All the confusion and conversation that's happening, like in the forums on the internet, that's confusing everyone. That's why people ask me, they're like, Amy, why don't you go in the forums and argue with people? I'm like, all of this is just the result of this problem, that people don't know that this is the problem that we're having. So to solve this problem, we have to look for foods that the bird is happy to eat, fits their taste profile, that is palatable to them, that is lower in metabolizable energy for the non-breeding, high in metabolizable energy for when you want to push them into breeding. So you got to get the ranges right. That has enough protein, the correct protein profile to hit all their essential amino acids and their total protein needs, and as much of the vitamins and minerals as we can. And then for the additional vitamins and minerals gap that you're not going to be able to make up, we use a supplement. So if I had to do an all fresh food diet, which I have had clients do that, we balance the fresh food diet and then we add vitamin and mineral supplement as just the powdered part. So the most important things is you've got to hit your protein and fiber requirements and then make sure they're getting enough calories. And then the vitamins and minerals, we can use a powdered vitamin mineral supplement to boot that. So it's really interesting, the problem we've put ourselves into. But if you understand that overarching problem, you're less likely to get confused by people kind of arguing back and forth of like, what's good and what's not. Like all of this just comes from a lack of information. I usually tell people get very, very nervous because it just feels like there's no consensus. And I usually just tell people, like, if people are arguing about it, they probably shouldn't be talking about it because there's really nothing to argue about. If you put me and like 4 other highly skilled nutritionists in one room, there will be not a single argument present because we all know the situation at hand. If we want to do all fresh, then this is the way we balance all fresh. If you want to do some fresh, some hybrid, because that's what people are able to do, then this is how we balance. It's just a matter of the math and meeting the bird's behavioral needs. So we can do a really concentrated pellet that just carries a lot of vitamin and mineral supplement and mostly fresh food, but then that requires you to do more work. You can't fall back on that pellet because it's too concentrated to be just fed as the base diet, right? Like let's say, but if you make a pellet that's not as concentrated that you can feed as a base diet, now if you put too much fresh food that's not balanced, it's not supplemented enough. So the fight from the parrot diet side is, who are you making this diet for? And are they going to hold up their end of the deal and balance the fresh food correctly? So a good example would be some of the diets that are made specifically for zoos are very concentrated because you have dedicated zookeepers and dedicated nutritionists who are going to balance that fresh food every day, exactly as it's supposed to be balanced. And so they can afford to just have this very concentrated pellet and a large amount of fresh food. But if you have an owner in a home who just needs to put something in that bowl and go, and sometimes they do fresh food, sometimes they don't, you can't afford to have a pellet like that. So understanding what the numbers are and what it's for will eliminate a lot of the confusion about this pellet is better than that one. I'm like, actually, it's completely irrelevant. Like all of this is completely irrelevant. If you know the analysis and the nutritional levels and who you're prescribing this nutrition to and what they're capable of providing, the consistency they can provide it at, then you start to know, okay, like if this person can only provide a variety of veggies and it's not that consistent, then you need a pellet that's going to do most of the heavy lifting and it's not going to be as varied. But if you have a person who wants to do all fresh, I've had clients do all fresh and we do very, very little concentrated pellet or just vitamin mineral supplement. So it more depends on who you're working with rather than like this like overarching universal answer. Mhm.
I think you run into that a lot with so many different things of people get kind of stuck on like what is the correct way to do something or what is the right way to do something. But in reality, you can have a lot of different types of diet as long as that bird's nutritional needs are being met. That can look a lot of different ways. And I think that people want to do what is right for their bird, but there's not necessarily one right or one wrong.
Yeah.
And
The
there's
right is their behavioral needs are met, the nutritional needs are met, and
um,
their social needs are met, and you can do it every day. That's right. You can make a complete protein with, let's say, like millet.
let's see. Amy, I'm not able to hear you. Is everyone else able to hear Amy? Oh, did she die? Okay. Okay. 1 second. We're gonna update our lost sound after millet. Okay, perfect.
Okay, how about now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, it's because my microphone died.
Got it, got it. I think we were talking about carbohydrates, providing a complete carbohydrate in millet. So,
Oh, yes. So if you can make a complete protein profile if you know the amino acid composition of the ingredients that you're using. You could, let's say, combine millets and amaranth and quinoa and make a relatively complete uh, base. One of the challenges that this is again a corner that we put ourselves in. Um, Humans, the grains that you have access to in the supermarket are not are they're a result of human agriculture. So we are not dependent on metabolizable energy or calorie density for our breeding. We are year-round breeders, right? We cycle the whole year. We don't have on and off, right? But the birds use calorie density. Well, the birds meaning these types of parrots use calorie density to turn their breeding on and off. That's how they know when it's time to breed and when it's not time to breed. So the problem is that finding grains that are underneath the breeding threshold, which is from the UC Davis data, is about 3,100 kcal per kilogram. To find grains under that threshold is almost non-existent. So that's why if you feed a lot of grains and beans and things in your diet, you're going to see a lot of hormones. But then if you don't feed that, the vegetables are not enough protein. So now what do we do? So we've put ourselves in kind of a tricky situation because how do we meet their protein needs without also delivering all this additional calorie density that will now cause a hormone problem? So the solution, it's one solution humans have come up with is to remove some parts of the carbs and the fats and keep just the protein. So that's when we come up with the idea of formulated diets, right? Mm-hmm. One of the tools of formulated diets is it allows you this, right? So we can make it happen by carefully balancing. We know the metabolizable energy is a little high, but we make sure to serve a limited amount so there's not too much excess. And usually you can keep a lid on it that way. So you can get an all fresh diet. It's a little over threshold, but you keep the excess in control. So you can handle it different ways. But if you have another trigger, like you got really high temperature, high humidity trigger, you might not be able to allow that little bit of excess on the calorie density. So when you look at the different triggers, it depends on where you are and who you are, right? My clients in Singapore, that temperature and humidity is no joke.
Yeah.
Versus my clients in Canada, you can get away with a little more calorie density because it's colder there some parts of the year, right? So
interesting. Yeah, we do some like when we're getting into kind of hormonal times of the year, we do a little bit of diet adjustment where we reduce the amount of fat and sugar in the diet. And it's really wild to see how quickly it can help some of those hormonal years. And it just goes to show like how sensitive they are to their diet as a whole. I
Very.
had a question. So, here at TGF, we do like a morning feeding and then an afternoon feeding to kind of replicate some of those more natural feeding patterns that you see in the wild. A lot of the budgies that we see coming in have like just all day access to their food. And I think again, like having that excess of food is probably something that you see a lot.
Yeah.
So when you are feeding your kiddos, do you have feeding times and then like
Yeah.
remove their food after a certain amount of time?
So I do it this way. So we have first thing in the morning when we wake up, our first foraging period, we do fresh food out. So I wake up in the morning, I pull the food and water bowls out, put them in the sink, wash them, and then we do fresh food first. So everybody go on the dining table, me included with my breakfast. We all do feeding frenzy foraging, chop on the dining table. So once they've eaten their fresh food, I'll do a little bit of training. So I'll typically offer something a little higher value, nutriberries or a little pinch of millet. You got to really be careful how much millet you're feeding, how much nutriberries you're feeding. But nutriberries, millet, we do some training, some interaction over that morning foraging period. When it's time to go back, I will put a piece of nutriberry back with them and I'll put a bit of their base pellet. So a lot of times people are just putting an endless amount of seed or an endless amount of pellet. I know how much they're going to eat between, let's say if they wake up at 7 and they go back to their cages at 10:30. Let's say they still have another hour and a half before noon, before they might take kind of their midday nap. So I know they're going to eat a bit more, leave some pellet along with whatever reinforcer went in there. So they have food, but it's not this like crazy excess of like just a pile of endless pellet that's just sitting out. So I just add a little bit more, make sure they have enough. And then come time for the afternoon session, we do another group foraging time, like group foraging either here or out there. I have like multiple of these like foraging platforms. And then same thing, we do a little more like reinforcing, stationing. And then when they go back, they get another reinforcer. And I put a little bit of pellet to carry them over the night. So it's never this like huge excess, but they also don't have to go completely without food. But it is important to replicate the dual foraging periods. You're going to get much better results because they feel like everything's moving well. Sometimes people would tell me like I tried to train my budgies around this time and it's like 2 in the afternoon or something. And all the budgies are just sleeping. They're like doing their midday nap and we're just like trying to bug them.
Evie.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. I think we probably have time for one more question. And this one is it terrible to keep a lone budgie?
Mm-hmm.
This person doesn't work and they spend at least 6 hours a day with him in his room. But maybe some thoughts about having like another companion parent. I know we kind
Yeah.
of talked about what is a flock when we were having our discussion. So
Yeah. So with having a single budgie, it's actually not too different from having a single parrot of other kinds, right? They're not getting that con-specific socialization. The swarming nature of the budgie does lend itself a lot more to having multiple budgies. So there's certainly a lot of benefit there. Choosing the right budgie is important. What I usually tell people is that if you have one budgie, I would rather you wait for the right candidate if you're going to add a budgie and not just rush and just get some random bird because a lot of times people will be told like you can't have a single budgie and they'll rush and get another budgie that's not a good fit. So you have a 5-year-old adult male, I'm going to look for another adult male, right? Like Louis is a adult male of unknown age, so I adopted Bino Bino, who's like 2.5 years old, and another male, right? Um, but if you have a single budgie, I would say the best thing you can do is to have a clear picture of what their real needs are. Because what's usually happening is that um, because there's so much conflicting information on the internet, people are kind of scrambling to try to make sure they're doing enough, but then they're doing like 100 things and burning themselves out, and like 98 of those things are not actually moving the needle for the bird because it's not actually what the bird cares about. So I would say getting a really good idea of what are the real social needs of this bird. Proximity is the biggest one. They need proximity to the flock and then the social parallel activity. So if you can provide those things, you just existing there is not quite the same as you don't necessarily have to be one-on-one interaction, direct interaction. What they're looking for is parallel activity. So providing that proximity and parallel activity in the dual foraging periods with enough time is going to do you a lot better, right? Than kind of like mishmash, like throwing spaghetti at the wall. So if you have a single budgie, I would say knowing those needs and being targeted about how you're meeting them is going to do a lot more for your budgie. When I say like, a lot of times people ask me, like, is it terrible? It's like a moral question that I feel like is not, it's not really mine to answer. It's more like if you have a single budgie, these are kind of the pros and cons and the limitations and the things that the pitfalls that we're dealing with. Just like if you have a mixed flock of 8 budgies, we have some different pitfalls that we have to deal with, right?
Mhm.
So I will say having single budgies, the chance of them being prone to behavioral issues is higher because they're not getting as much social needs met. So if they really bond to you, they can start to do the same thing other parrots do, which is use the human as their pair bonded mate, and you'll get the same behavior issues that you see in all the other parrots. But because budgies are small, it's easier to get a second one. Um, there is some fear that once you get a second one, they won't care about you anymore. And what that usually tells me is that it means the original relationship was not fully built well because the initial relationship, the bird was kind of desperate for socialization of some kind. And so you were getting something. But if you have a really good relationship, bringing in a second scared budgie will often actually, the scared budgie will grow faster because your skill level is that good. So, for example, when I bought in Bluebell, because the relationship I had with Louie and Bino is so well established, she would just copy them because she would freak out and be scared, and they would just be like, I don't know what this is about. And especially if you don't trigger the scared budgie's fear, then you'll never see the scared budgie get scared. So one of the things that happens is you get 2 budgies, you get a little close to the cage, you know, the new budgie gets scared and panics and goes to the back of the cage or freaks out. But remember how these birds defend themselves in the wild. They're striped like that. So it's really hard to see where one bird starts and another bird ends. And when they're all down there eating like this, if a hawk comes and one bird sees a predator and takes off, the other bird is not going to stand there and go, and verify if the predator is actually coming or what's going on. Like, it's not going to be that. If the bird next to them takes off, they will all take off together and think about the reason why later, right? So when you're working with a second budgie in that situation, the key is your skill level. I work at the level of the scared budgie to never trigger their fear. And because they never get scared, they never trigger my existing budgies either. So on multiple fronts, you're just moving step by step forward. And then once I get the existing budgie not too scared of me, I can interact with the other budgies in front of them. You leverage their social and observational learning skills. And then once you provide the direct information to them, they've already seen the possibility. So once you provide them the training, it comes together really fast. Bluebell is very forward. I would say she's more forward than Louie, and she's the last one to join, which is really funny. So yeah, it's
I like this question. I feel like we get this a lot, even with like non-budgie owners, of just like parrot people in general, of like wondering if they should get a friend for their bird. And I do think it is kind of like that moral question, like you said, like personally, like I like having con-specific flock members. And I also like for my birds to have other people and other birds to interact with so that I don't see as much of those like very dependent behaviors on me, any of the kind of problematic behaviors that you can see of like a bonded pair. Um, but I am guilty of like I had a Bork and I was like, this was when I was a child.
yeah.
I had a Bork and we were like, he needs a girlfriend. And then we just got a young Budgie from a pet store,
Yeah.
an older guy. We just put them in a cage together right off the bat, and she completely overpreened the top of his head. So the top of his head was completely bald. He looked like a little friar or something like that. And I felt so horrible because then he was like getting overpreened and
Mm,
his dynamic changed a lot.
mm,
So I think that yeah, if you're considering getting another bird, I would definitely try to find a bird that would be a good match for your
yeah.
existing
The
flock.
candidate is
Um,
key, you know,
I think
starting
that's
the
so
bird
important.
right. Yeah, like starting the bird right makes a big difference. But when it comes to these like moral questions in general, what I usually tell people is people a lot of times are afraid to mess up in parrot care. And I very often see clients coming in, they're like desperate for help, but they come in like this because they're afraid because they've been in the forums and been yelled at and all this. And they're just
Yeah.
coming at me like, they're like, Amy, I'm afraid you're going to yell at me. And they find out that I have no interest in doing so. And the reason I tell them is because if you see enough of the history of the bird world, these things, these challenges we have, it is inevitable. Like these challenges, this is where we are in history, right? And a person coming to me with a bird who's feather damaging, it's inevitable that there are birds right now who are feather damaging because we didn't have the knowledge and the resources. So it's not like a lot of times people get kind of bullied a lot in the forums, like it's some kind of personal failing, you know? And it's so sad because it's typically the people who care the most are the ones who are trying to ask questions and then they're getting punished for it. Um, yeah, so to me, it's the system as we have now. This is the state of the system we have now. We make our effort to improve the lives of the birds that we have in our care. And these are the challenges that we're dealing with at this current point in history. If you rewinded like 50 years, you would see so many different types of nutritional deficiencies that we don't see anymore since the rise of pellets. A lot of times people want to do like all good or all bad. I'm like, it's not the good or bad, it's just a bit of technological advancement. Before, parrots used to just eat table food and pasta and have crazy nutritional deficiencies. We have pellets now, and we made that step forward, and we will continue to make more steps forward and more steps forward. So before, 10 years ago, a chronic egg laying was the death sentence, and today it no longer is. And 10 years from now, we'll have something completely different. So we progress, and all of us have our birds in our care. We each do our part to continue to progress, if it's something that we care about, and we will move the needle year by year, decade by decade. By the time, hopefully, if I get to live a full life, knock on wood, by the time my life is over, the world of parrots may look very different, right? So,
You always have that caveat as well of like the information that we're providing you now is the best and like newest information that we have at this moment, but take it with a grain of salt because it'll probably be different in another
yeah,
decade.
yeah, and it'll probably be better. Budgies used to be thought of as cage ornaments that couldn't be trained, and now we have so many videos of budgies on the internet who are living their best life. They are living it
As
up,
they
right?
should.
They are just absolutely living their best life. And yeah, I think eventually we're going to have more people with budgies who have access to aviaries, who have integrated budgie furniture in the home, who have um, fully integrated communication system with the human, right? So yeah, I usually tell people to let the moral things, like, not to let it like cloud you too much, because I think if you feel like your bird's not at the level of welfare you would like, okay, then let's just make some effort to improve their welfare, and that's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be this like shaming and blaming exercise. Like,
Mhm.
I want my bird to have access to more, and I'll just go get them more, and that's it, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you again so much for joining us today. And thank you for everyone that hopped on with us. There were some really good questions.
Mm-hmm.
And if people have additional questions or they were interested in doing some consulting with you or anything like that, Is it thebudgieacademy.com?
It is .com. Message me on Instagram if because right now my consultations are not open on my website.
Got
I've
it.
been procrastinating.
Well,
But
there's so many clients out there, though. There's
I
only
know
so
people
many
are like,
with.
someone emailed me being like, "Hey, could you like do a consultation?" And I was like, "Hi, I'm give me
I'm
some time. Like, give
booked.
me a minute. Like, give me a minute. I'm working on it." Yeah, I decided to take a couple months off, and I definitely needed the couple months off. So, but I'm excited to jump back in. Probably by the end of the month, I'll open them back up again. Let's see once I finish all the tech in the background and I finish my little sabbatical that I got going on.
Much needed. Awesome.
Yeah, my little mini sabbatical.
Amy also has a lot of great content already on your platforms. So Instagram, you have a TikTok as well. Contact Best is on Instagram, but you have a lot of really great videos that are talking a little bit more in depth about some of the topics that we kind of briefly touched on. So I would
Yeah.
recommend if anybody's interested to go and watch some of those and go from there.
Yeah. Thank you for organizing
Of
everything.
course, this was fun. I was super excited.
Yeah, if I can, yeah, if anybody needs to contact me, you know where to find me. Don't
Yes,
hesitate. If it's not a budgie, it's totally okay. If it's something that's out of my realm, I can at least point you in the right direction. If it's like a parrot that's some completely different species and it's something that it's out of my realm of expertise, I'll point you in the right direction too. So
awesome. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, I will have this published maybe like Tuesday or Wednesday on our YouTube channel. And if you have any other like non-webinar related questions, feel free to email us and we'll get back to you. All right. Thank you guys.